Although this blanket is knitted in a really lovely pale purple, I don't want you to think that it is a blanket that's only suitable for a girl. I've named this design Taylor, which is a gender neutral name for that very specific reason. This blanket will work in any colour, and for this design I've had a lot of fun, again like I did with Harvey, sandwiching purl stitches into some stockinette and then separating up those blocks of stockinette with some garter stitch, which is my all-time favourite stitch to work with. I think it's so underrated. Taylor is a 20 row repeat, but 8 of those rows are just knit stitches, so don't let the fact that it's a 20 row repeat put you off from attempting it. These blocks of 20 rows work up so quickly. To knit a blanket the same size as mine, which is 60 centimetres wide by 80 centimetres long, you are going to need 400 grams of double knit yarn. For those of you overseas, that is light worsted weight yarn or 3-weight yarn. You are also going to need some 4mm circular needles. For length, you're looking at anything between 80 centimetres to 120 centimetres. And if you're planning on a bigger blanket, then you will obviously need an appropriate length cable for the size of blanket that you want to knit. You are also going to need some embroidery scissors and 2 stitch markers. These help to mark where your side borders are on your blanket and where your middle textured pattern is. So without further ado, grab some needles, grab your yarn, and let's get knitting. As this blanket design has a built-in edge, I like to treat the pattern multiple for the middle textured panels separately to the edge stitches. So the pattern multiple for that middle textured panel is 6 plus 1. So you want to cast on a multiple of 6 stitches and then add 1 more stitch. Then for your side borders, you need to cast on an additional 18 stitches in total. That is 9 stitches for each side of the blanket. If you want to make a blanket exactly the same size as mine, you will need to cast on 133 stitches. But for today's tutorial, I'm just making a very small sample, so I'm going to go ahead and cast on 49. I like to use the long tail cast on method, but if you have a method that you prefer to use, then please go ahead and use that. It really doesn't matter. The first part of the blanket that we need to work is the bottom garter stitch border, and for that you're going to work 15 rows in exactly the same way. You want to knit everything except the final stitch, so you want to knit all the way across until you have 1 stitch left on your left hand needle. The final stitch of each row is our selvage stitch. That's what creates the really nice braided edge up the long sides of our blanket and just gives it a really polished look. And instead of knitting this stitch, we're going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. So the first thing you want to do is pop your working yarn to the front of your work, however you feel comfortable doing, and then you want to pop your right hand needle into the stitch from right to left, so as if to purl, and not from left to right as if to knit. So pop that stitch all the way in from right to left, and when it's firmly on this right hand needle, you can pop your left hand needle out of the stitch and then lift this yarn to the front of your work so that you don't accidentally create a new stitch. That's row 1 done, and you need to work another 14 rows in exactly the same way until you've worked a total of 15 rows. When you've worked your 15 rows, you should have a piece of work that looks a bit like this, and you should be able to count 8 garter ridges on the front of your work. The right side of your work is the work that is facing you just when you're about to start your next row, which will be the first row of our 20 row repeat. The first time we work row 1, we're going to do a little bit of setup work to add these stitch markers in so that we can mark our edges nice and clearly. But after you work row 1 this first time, every other time you work the row, you are just going to slip the markers at the point that I tell you to place them in this video. Row 1, you want to start by knitting 9 stitches. Then you want to grab the first of those stitch markers and pop it on your right hand needle. That marks our right hand side garter stitch border. Then you want to carry on knitting across your work until you have 9 stitches left on your left hand needle. Just like at the other end of the row, when you have 9 stitches left on this left hand needle, you're going to pop your second stitch marker onto that right hand needle and then knit the next 8 stitches. And as with the bottom garter edging, the final stitch of the row, we're going to slip purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 2 starts with knitting the first 9 stitches, and that should take you to your stitch marker. Slip that stitch marker over, and then you want to purl across until you hit your second marker. So all the way across until you hit your second marker is just purl stitches. Slip the second marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. And then finish the row by slipping the final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 3, you want to knit the 9 stitches before the stitch marker. Slip that marker over and then knit the next 5 stitches. And then you want to repeat the following 6 stitches until 2 stitches before the second stitch marker. You are going to work purl 3 and then knit 3. So purl 3, knit 3 until 2 stitches before your stitch marker. Those final 2 stitches before the marker you are going to knit, slip the second marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. And then the final stitch, just slip purlwise with the yarn in front, and that completes row 3. Row 4, knit 9. Slip the marker over and then purl across until you hit your second marker. Slip the second marker over and knit 8. Finish the row by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 5 is nice and easy. You just want to knit all the way across, slipping the stitch markers as you come across them, and then the final stitch, instead of knitting it, you're going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 6, knit 9. Slip the marker over and then purl across until you hit your second marker. Slip the second marker over and then knit 8. Finish the row by slipping the final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 7 starts with knitting the 9 stitches before the marker. Slip that marker over and then knit 2 more stitches. Then purl the next 3 stitches. And then you want to work knit 3, purl 3 until 2 stitches before your second marker. That's knit 3, purl 3 until 2 stitches before your second marker. Knit the 2 stitches before the stitch marker, slip that marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. And then finish the row by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 8 starts with knitting the 9 stitches before the marker. Slip the marker over and then purl across until you hit your second marker. So just purl every single stitch until you get to your second marker. Slip the second marker over and knit 8. And then finish by slipping the final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 9 is another nice and easy one. You're going to knit all the way across, slip your markers as you come across them, and then instead of knitting that final stitch, you're going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 10, you want to knit until you hit the first marker. That's 9 stitches, so knit 9. Slip the first marker over and then purl across until you hit your second marker. Slip that second marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. And then finish your row by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 11 starts with knitting the 9 stitches before the marker. Slip the marker over and then knit the next 5 stitches. And then you want to work purl 3, knit 3 until 2 stitches before your second marker. So that's purl 3, knit 3 until 2 stitches before your second marker. You should hit those 2 stitches after a knit 3, and then you're just going to carry on and knit those final 2 stitches. Slip the marker over and then knit 8. Finish the row by slipping the final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 12 starts with knitting the 9 stitches before that first stitch marker. Slip the marker over and then purl across till your second marker. Slip that second marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. Finish the row by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. The next 8 rows, row 13 through to row 20, are worked in exactly the same way. You are going to knit all the way across, slipping your markers as you go. And then for your final stitch, instead of knitting it, you are going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. So you are going to work this exact same row for the next 8 rows. So all the way through until you have worked your 20th row. After you've worked 20 rows, your work should look a little bit like this. You should be just about to start a right side row. And you would now go away and repeat your rows 1 to 20 until your project is about 10 centimeters shorter than you want it to be. What you will need to do after you have done that is to repeat rows 1 to 12 once more, and then stop and move on to your garter stitch border at the top. In the case of my blanket that you saw in the introduction, I repeated rows 1 to 20 12 times, so I was able to count 12 of these stockinette blocks, and at that point I worked rows 1 to 12 once more. That gave me a 13th stockinette block. So if you want to go ahead and do that, work as many as you want to. If you're replicating my blanket, work 12, so 11 more of these, and then work rows 1 to 12 once more, and then come back and we will be ready to move on to that top garter stitch border. Your project is obviously going to be a lot bigger than mine. You will have lots more of these stockinette sections and lots more of these garter stitch sections than I've got here. I've worked one repeat of 20 rows, and then I've worked rows 1 to 12 once more. And it is at this point that you would now start your garter stitch border after a row 12. So you leave out 8 rows when you are working the final repeat. The top garter stitch border is worked in exactly the same way as the bottom garter stitch border, with the only difference being that we work 16 rows of this border, whereas we worked 15 rows for the bottom border. The result is the same, it's just because of the way the repeat works that we need to work 1 extra row on the top here so that we're casting off with the right side facing. So for the next 16 rows, you are going to just knit every single stitch, with the exception of the final stitch that you're going to continue slipping purlwise with the yarn in front like you have for the rest of the project. And when you work this first row, you can also remove your stitch markers as you go along. We don't need those anymore. So if you now go away and knit 16 rows like this, and then come back and I will show you how we cast off and get this project off our needles and into a finished blanket. After 16 rows, you will have a project that looks pretty much like a finished blanket, but you will still have your work on your needles, and therefore the last step that we need to work is to cast off to get our stitches off our needles and our blanket into a finished object. The cast off we are going to work is a basic knitted cast off. I'm just going to cover it very briefly, but if you would like a more in-depth video, I do have one that walks it through in really beginner friendly steps, and I'll link that here now. But a basic knitted cast off, for those of you who don't know, you are just going to knit the first 2 stitches. Make sure you don't have your tension too tight, you want it quite nice and relaxed for this bit. And then once you've knitted 2 stitches, you are going to grab the right hand of those 2 stitches, i.e. the first one you knitted, with your left hand needle, and you are going to lift it up and over the second stitch you knitted and then off that right hand needle. So you have gone from 2 stitches on your right hand needle to 1 stitch. Then the next step is to knit 1 more stitch. So you go back up to 2 stitches on this needle, and then you are going to lift it over again and go from 2 stitches down to 1. So that is the process that you work all the way along the row. You're going to knit 1 and lift 1, and if at any point you end up with more than 2 stitches on this right hand needle, then you have knitted 1 too many and you just need to backtrack a little bit before you do any more casting off. So if you want to go ahead and do that all the way along until you have just 1 stitch left on this right hand needle and none left on this left hand needle, and then we can talk through the last bits and bobs that we do to tidy up our blanket into a finished object. When you reach the point that you have 1 stitch left on your right hand needle and nothing left on your left hand needle, you are ready to finish off your work. At this point you can break your yarn. Make sure that you leave a nice long tail, at least 20 centimeters long, so you can sew in your ends when you are finishing everything off. And one last step that I like to work is just to pull this last stitch slightly bigger, not so big that your tail comes through the other way. Get rid of the needle, we don't need those anymore. And then I pop my tail through that larger loop that I've just created, and then I gently pull to tighten it all up. And then once you sew your end in, you get a nice neat corner. Before I go, a couple of questions that I often get asked. Can you knit this in any yarn? Yes, absolutely. Just make sure that you are using the right size needle for the weight yarn you are working, and you will need to adjust how many stitches you cast on to deal with any extra or less width that you need, depending on whether or not you are using a thinner yarn or a thicker yarn. Is this blanket reversible? No. 9 times out of 10, when you are using any sort of stockinette stitch pattern, your blanket will not be reversible. So as you can see here, this is the reverse of the blanket, and it pretty much looks just like garter stitch. There is no defined pattern on the back like there is on the front. I do have a free pattern listed on my blog for you, and I will link that in the description below. So if you want some written instructions to follow along with, or just need to recap any of the details that I've covered in the video, then you can head on over to there and you will find all the details that you need written up in a blog post for you. And there you go. That's how you knit your very own tailor blanket. I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you have, I would love it if you'd give it a thumbs up. And if you're looking for more blanket inspiration, then why not take a look at the video that I've linked here now, because you might find that you like that one just as much as this one. I'll see you again for another video soon.